The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. My father said them in front of 40 guests, 3 cousins I hadn't seen in a decade, and my 4-year-old daughter, who was sitting on my husband's lap at the time. My husband didn't flinch. He didn't clench his jaw or ball his fists or do any of the things a man is supposed to do when he's been insulted in his own home. He simply set down his fork, placed his napkin on the table beside his plate, and he looked at my father the way you look at someone who just confirmed everything you already knew about them. He didn't say a word. 2 days later, my father would be sitting in a room full of 300 people, watching that same man receive something Gerald Whitfield could never buy with all the dealership money in Georgia. And for the first time in 67 years, my father had nothing to say. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What happened in those 2 days changed 5 relationships in my family permanently, and it started with a phone call I should never have answered. Before I go on, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life who made it their mission to remind you that you weren't good enough? A parent, a partner, a friend who smiled to your face but sharpened their knives behind your back. If you've ever felt that knot in your stomach when you see their name on your phone, if you've ever rehearsed conversations in the shower that you knew you'd never have the courage to say out loud, then I need you to do something for me right now. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I'm about to tell you. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when you finally stop waiting for someone to see your worth and start showing them instead. Drop your location and your local time in the comments below. I'm always amazed at where you all are watching from, what time zones, what cities, what corners of the world this story finds you in. My name is Cora. I'm 33 years old. I'm a nurse in Savannah, Georgia, at Memorial Health University Medical Center, working the night shift in the oncology ward. I've watched people fight for their lives at 3 in the morning. I've held the hands of strangers while they took their last breaths. I've seen what really matters when everything else falls away. And this is the story of how my father tried to destroy my marriage at his own anniversary party. How he invited the man he wished I'd married and seated him next to me like a prop in a play he'd been writing for years. And how a quiet man in a $20 tie answered him without ever raising his voice. Now, let me take you back 8 weeks ago to the evening. My mother's number appeared on my phone for the first time in 5 years. I was kneeling beside the bathtub, rinsing shampoo out of Lily's hair. She was 4 years old, all elbows and giggles, splashing water over the side of the tub despite my constant reminders that the bath mat was not a swimming pool. Her hair was the color of mine when I was her age, a brown that would eventually darken, and it was tangled from a day of preschool adventures that involved something she called digging for treasure in the playground dirt. I had just worked the last of the conditioner through her ends when my phone buzzed on the tile floor. The screen lit up. The screen said Mom. Not Mom with a heart emoji like some people have, just Mom. Capital letters, no photo, no contact image. I had deleted everything else 5 years ago. Every photo, every memory, every trace of the woman who had watched her husband disown her daughter and said nothing. I only kept the number in case of emergency, death or hospitalization. Those were the only 2 reasons I told myself I'd ever pick up. But I picked up anyway. Cora, her voice was already wet, already trembling. My mother could cry on command. I'd known that since I was 12 years old when she'd tear up at the dinner table to deflect my father's anger, when she'd sob during parent-teacher conferences to make the teachers feel guilty for criticizing me. This was a woman who had turned tears into a survival strategy, a shield she'd carried for 40 years. But this sounded different, thinner, older. Like the crying had worn grooves into her voice that couldn't be smoothed over. Hi, Mom. The word felt foreign in my mouth after 5 years of silence, like speaking a language you used to know but had forgotten. Your father and I are having our 45th anniversary, a big gathering. Family, friends, the whole neighborhood, we want you there. I didn't say anything. Lily splashed her rubber duck against the side of the tub, completely unaware that the world had just shifted beneath my feet. He's different, Cora. He asks about you. Last Christmas, he sat in Lily's nursery, the room we set up for her when you were pregnant. He just sat there in the rocking chair we bought for you. He didn't turn on the lights. Just sat in the dark. I closed my eyes. 5 years ago, my father had stood in his kitchen, the same kitchen where he taught me to scramble eggs when I was 6 years old, standing on a step stool that he'd built himself, and given me an ultimatum. His exact words, delivered with the same steady calm he used to negotiate car deals, were, "You drop that teacher or you don't walk through this door again." I chose Nathan. The door slammed. 5 years of silence followed. 5 Christmases spent in our small apartment in Savannah. 5 birthdays where my phone stayed quiet. 5 years of watching Lily grow from an infant to a toddler to a little girl who asked questions about grandparents she'd never met. Now Diane was filling that silence with tears. "Lily deserves to know her grandparents. Megan's already talked to your father. Everyone's ready. You're the only one who hasn't come home." There it was, the framing, the manipulation that had been honed over decades of family dinners and holiday gatherings. I was the holdout. I was the problem. I was the one keeping Lily from her family, her heritage, her birthright. Never mind that my father had been the one to slam the door. Never mind that he'd been the one to call my husband worthless. In my mother's version of events, I was the villain of this story, the prodigal daughter who refused to return. I looked at Lily. She was 4 years old and had never met her grandparents. She didn't know their faces, their voices, the smell of my mother's lavender lotion that always clung to her cardigans. She didn't know the sound of my father's laugh or the way he whistled through his teeth when he was concentrating. She was growing up in a world where her mother's parents were just stories, just names I sometimes mentioned in passing. That was the weakness, and my mother knew exactly where to press. "I'll think about it, Mom." The words came out before I could stop them. 5 years of careful distance, 5 years of building a life that didn't include them, and I was already crumbling. "That's all I'm asking, sweetheart. Just think about it." She hung up before I could change my mind, before I could ask the questions that were clawing at my throat. What had changed? Why now? What did my father really want? Lily looked up at me with big brown eyes that matched Nathan's. "Who was that, Mommy? Was it someone from the hospital?" I didn't answer right away. I wrapped her in a towel, lifted her out of the tub, and held her against my chest for a moment longer than usual. I could feel her heart beating against mine, quick and light, completely unaware that her world might be about to change. "It was your grandmother," I said finally. The words felt strange. My grandmother. "Yes, my mommy, just like I'm your mommy." She considered this. "Do grandmas give hugs?" "Some do." "Does my grandma give hugs?" I didn't know how to answer that. My mother gave hugs like she gave everything else. Conditionally, strategically, when there was an audience to witness them. "Yes," I said, "she gives hugs." Lily seemed satisfied with this. She wiggled out of my arms and ran toward her bedroom, leaving a trail of water droplets on the floor. I followed slowly, my phone still buzzing in my hand. 2 more texts from my mother. Photos of the house decorated for Christmas last year. A picture of an empty rocking chair in what looked like a nursery. Manipulation in digital form, designed to make me feel guilty for a distance I hadn't created. Nathan was at the kitchen table grading essays when I came downstairs. Red pen in one hand, mug of cold coffee in the other. He had a stack of 11th grade papers on the Reconstruction era spread before him, and he was circling a paragraph with the kind of care most people reserve for legal contracts or love letters. His brow was furrowed in concentration, and I could see him mouthing words to himself as he read. Completely absorbed in the world of teenage grammar and historical analysis. He didn't hear me come in. He never did when he was grading. The world fell away when Nathan worked, and there was something beautiful about that, something that made me love him more every time I watched him disappear into his passion. "My mom called," I said. The words hung in the air like a verdict. He didn't look up right away. He finished his mark, capped his pen with a soft click, and then gave me his full attention. That was Nathan. He never half listened, never nodded along while checking his phone. When you spoke to him, you became the only thing in his world. It was one of the first things I'd fallen in love with back when we were both 23 and working summer jobs at a coffee shop near the university. He'd listened to me ramble about my nursing prerequisites for 3 hours one slow Tuesday, and I'd never felt more seen in my life. "She wants us to come to their 45th anniversary," I continued. "A big reunion. The whole family, everyone." "When?" "Next Saturday." He was quiet for a moment. Not the hesitant kind of quiet, the thinking kind. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, weighing the possibilities, the risks, the potential for disaster. Nathan had every right to refuse. My father had called him a babysitter at our wedding. He'd made jokes about Nathan's salary during his toast, standing there with a glass of champagne while 200 people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. He'd told anyone who would listen that his daughter had married beneath her, that she'd thrown away her future on a man who would never provide for her the way she deserved. Nathan had heard it all. He'd smiled and shaken hands and thanked my father for his blessing, and then he'd taken my hand and we danced until the music stopped, and he'd never once complained about the way my family treated him. "If you want to go," he said finally, "we go. But I need you to know something. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I'd never ask you to." "I know, I'm just saying it out loud, so there's no confusion." I sat across from him, my fingers finding his across the table. Between the essay stacks, I noticed a large manila envelope, thick and official-looking, stamped with the Chatham County Board of Education seal in blue ink. It was already opened, the letter halfway pulled out, then tucked back in like he'd read it and set it aside. Something about the way he'd hidden it caught my attention, but I let it go. I had bigger things on my mind. "What's that?" I asked anyway, nodding toward the envelope. Nathan glanced at it, slid it under a pile of papers with a casualness that felt almost practiced. "Nothing urgent. School stuff. Bureaucracy. You know how it is." I didn't push. I should have. I would learn later that what was in that envelope would change everything, would give me 2 days of thinking my husband didn't care about the insults my father hurled at him. 2 days of wondering why Nathan could be so calm in the face of such deliberate cruelty. But in that moment, with Lily's laughter drifting from her bedroom and my mother's voice still echoing in my head, I let it go. "Lily's never met them," I said. "Not once. She's 4, Nathan. She doesn't even know what a grandparent is. She sees other kids at preschool talking about their grandmas and grandpas, and she doesn't understand why she doesn't have any." He reached across the table and took my hand. His fingers were warm, steady, the same fingers that had held mine through 12 hours of labor, that had signed our marriage license, that graded papers late into the night so his students could have feedback by morning. "Then let's give her the chance," he said. "That's reason enough." That was Nathan in a single sentence. A man who had been wronged more times than I could count by my family. A man who had every right to refuse to ever step foot in my parents' house again, and he was willing to go because Lily deserved the chance to know her grandparents. That was the kind of person he was. The kind who measured decisions not by what was fair to him, but by what was right. We decided that Friday. Drive up from Savannah, 4 hours to the little town outside Atlanta where I'd grown up. Stay the weekend, come back Sunday or Monday. A short trip, just long enough to let Lily meet her grandparents, to let my parents see their granddaughter, to pretend for a few days that the last 5 years hadn't happened. I didn't ask about that envelope. I wish I had. It would have saved me 2 days of thinking my husband didn't care about what my father said to him. 2 days of doubt that I would carry like a stone in my chest. The drive took 4 hours and 12 minutes. I know because Lily asked, "Are we there yet?" exactly 17 times, and I counted every single one. It became a game somewhere around the 3rd hour, a way to distract myself from the growing knot in my stomach. Lily would ask, I would tell her how many minutes were left, and she would sigh dramatically before finding something new to look at out the window. Nathan drove the whole way, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the center console where I could hold it when the anxiety got too loud. He didn't ask if I was okay. He already knew the answer. My parents' house hadn't changed. I don't know what I expected, 5 years of distance to have somehow altered the landscape of my childhood. But there it was, exactly as I remembered. Ranch-style, red brick, wide front lawn that my father mowed in perfect diagonal lines every Saturday morning. American flag on the porch post, waving in the Georgia breeze. The same azalea bushes my mother had planted when I was in middle school, now overgrown but still blooming in shades of pink and white. The same cracked driveway where I'd learned to ride a bike, fallen a dozen times, and gotten back up because my father had told me that Whitfields don't quit. Everything frozen in place, like the house had been holding its breath for 5 years, waiting for me to come back. My mother was at the door before we even parked. She came down the steps fast, too fast for a 65-year-old woman who claimed her knees were giving out whenever anyone asked her to help with chores. She wrapped her arms around me before I could even step out of the car, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and hairspray, and something underneath that I couldn't name. She held on for a long time, crying into my shoulder, her tears soaking through my blouse. "Oh, Cora, oh, my girl, my girl." The words came out broken, wet, and for a moment I let myself believe they were real, that she had missed me, that the last 5 years had been as hard on her as they'd been on me. But I knew my mother, and I knew that tears were her native language, fluency earned through decades of practice. My father stood behind her in the doorway. He was wearing his good khakis and a polo shirt, his version of dressing up, the same outfit he'd worn to every casual event since I was a child. He looked older than I remembered, thinner in the shoulders like he'd been slowly deflating over the years. His hair, once dark and thick, was now mostly gray, receding at the temples in a way that made his forehead look larger. But his eyes were the same. Sharp, assessing, calculating. The eyes of a man who had spent 40 years selling cars and learning exactly how to read people. He nodded at Nathan. The nod was minimal, almost imperceptible, a fraction of acknowledgement that stopped well short of welcome. Then he extended his hand. Nathan shook it. The handshake lasted maybe 2 seconds, firm enough to be polite, brief enough to make a point. Then Gerald saw Lily. Something shifted in his face. The calculation disappeared for just a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. He crouched down slowly, knees cracking audibly, and opened his arms. "Well, who is this pretty little lady?" Lily looked up at me uncertain. I nodded. "It's okay, baby. This is your grandfather." She walked to him, her small steps careful on the uneven driveway. He picked her up, and she giggled, and something inside me softened against my will. This was what I wanted for her. This was what I'd told myself I was doing this for. A grandfather's arms, a grandmother's hugs, the sense that she belonged to something larger than our little family of 3. Inside, Diane had set out sweet tea and pound cake on the kitchen table. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and pot roast, the same combination that had greeted me every day after school for 18 years. Normal. Safe. Almost. But as we moved through the rooms, I noticed small changes. Family photos that had once lined the hallway were now clustered on a single table, and I noticed that several of them featured me prominently. Like my parents had been preserving a shrine to a daughter who no longer lived there. In the living room, I noticed something else. An extra place setting at the dining table. A chair with a new cushion, bright and clean against the worn fabric of the other chairs. A glass of water already poured, positioned right next to where I'd be sitting. "Who's that for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Diane's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but I caught it. "Oh, a family friend is stopping by tomorrow, for the party." She changed the subject fast, too fast. That empty chair. I should have paid more attention to it. I should have asked more questions. But I was distracted by Lily's exploration of the house, by her excitement at discovering new rooms, by the way my mother followed her everywhere with a camera. Friday night, just the 6 of us. Gerald, Diane, Megan, Nathan, Lily, and me. A small dinner before the big event. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans from a can. The meal my mother had made every Friday since 1985, when she'd first married my father and learned that Friday nights were for comfort food. I'd eaten this exact meal 1,000 times at this exact table, in this exact room. It felt like stepping into a time capsule. For the first 20 minutes, it almost felt normal. Megan asked about Lily's preschool. She was 37 now, unmarried, still living at home, and I saw in her eyes a desperate kind of curiosity about my life outside this house. Diane fussed over everyone's plates, adding more potatoes, more roast, more of everything, as if food could bridge the gap that 5 years had carved between us. Gerald carved the roast with the same serrated knife he'd had since I was born, the wooden handle worn smooth by decades of use. Then he started in on Nathan. He didn't look up from his plate when he spoke. Still teaching, the way he said still like it was a chronic condition. Like Nathan had been diagnosed with something and everyone was just waiting for the remission. Like teaching was a phase to be outgrown, a mistake to be corrected. "Yes, sir. 11th grade American history. I also coached the debate team. Gerald chewed, swallowed, wiped his mouth with his napkin. You know who I ran into last month? Travis Keller. You remember Travis, Cora? I felt my spine stiffen, vaguely. Good kid, just opened his third dealership. BMW, he's not even 40 yet. Gerald was looking at Nathan when he said it. Not at me, at Nathan. That's ambition. That's what success looks like. The table went quiet for a half-beat. Megan reached for the bread basket and said, "This pot roast is amazing, Mom." God bless her for trying to steer the conversation to safer waters. Under the table, I found Nathan's hand. He squeezed mine once, calm, steady. Like he was telling me he'd been here before, he knew how to survive this. Gerald wasn't done. No offense, son. I just worry about my daughter's future. Teachers don't exactly retire rich. They don't take European vacations or buy lake houses or drive BMWs. They scrape by on pensions that barely cover groceries. Nathan's jaw tightened. Barely, just a flicker there and gone. We're doing fine, Gerald, thank you. Fine, Gerald repeated like the word tasted sour. Fine is a low bar. I raised my daughter to clear high bars. Diane clinked her fork against her glass. Who wants dessert? I made pecan pie. Gerald mentioned Travis twice more before the pie was gone. Once about his trip to Italy, once about his lake house. Each time his eyes drifted to Nathan. Each time the comparison hung in the air like an accusation. This wasn't small talk. This was target practice. And Nathan was the target. That night, I lay in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck up there in 7th grade were still faintly visible. Their light faded to a dim green glow. Little green ghosts of a girl who had once thought this house was the safest place in the world. I remembered sticking those stars up, standing on my bed with the adhesive tabs, carefully arranging them into constellations I'd learned in science class. I'd been so proud of them. I'd wanted to be an astronomer back then, before my father told me that astronomers don't make money, and I should think about something practical like nursing or teaching. Nathan was on the air mattress beside the bed, reading to Lily. Good Night, Moon. The same book he read to her every night, the same book his mother had read to him. Lily was almost asleep, her small fingers wrapped around his index finger, her breathing slowing with each page. He did the voices, the quiet old lady whispering hush, and Lily's eyes fluttered shut. He set the book down and looked at me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was full of everything we couldn't say. I stared at those ceiling stars and thought about what silence would cost. If I said nothing, if I smiled through the weekend and drove home and called it peace, what would Lily learn? What would she absorb from a room full of adults who watched her father be insulted and said nothing? She would learn that being a good person meant being a quiet target. She would learn that love meant swallowing insults. She would learn that some people were worth more than others, and her father was on the wrong side of that line. 5 years ago, Gerald had told his golf buddies that Nathan would never buy Cora a real house. He'd said it at a 4th of July barbecue, loud enough for 3 tables to hear. Nathan had been standing 6 feet away, holding a plate of corn on the cob. He'd heard every word. He hadn't said anything then either. Not because he was weak, because he didn't think a man who measured everything in square footage was worth the argument. He'd smiled, finished his corn, and never mentioned it to me. I'd only found out later from my cousin, who'd been horrified enough to call me. I'd left that night, packed my bag, driven to Savannah, and never come back, until now. The stakes were simple and impossible. If I stayed silent, I lost my self-respect. If I spoke up too early, I lost Lily's chance at having grandparents. Both options hurt, and Gerald was counting on that. He'd built his entire life on the assumption that people would choose peace over conflict, that they would swallow their pride to avoid a scene. It was how he'd controlled my mother for 45 years. It was how he'd controlled Megan into staying at home well into her 30s. It was how he'd assumed he would eventually control me. I didn't come back to fight. I came back because Lily deserves a family. But lying in that dark room, listening to my daughter breathe, I was starting to realize something. Not every family deserves Lily. Saturday morning, the house was chaos before 8 o'clock. Diane had hired a catering company, 2 women in black aprons who moved through the kitchen like ghosts. setting up chafing dishes on the back porch, arranging trays of food with practiced efficiency. A long folding table stretched across the yard, draped in white cloth that fluttered in the morning breeze. At the head of the driveway, a hand-painted banner read, "Whitfield Family, 45 years," in blue letters that matched the color scheme of my parents' bedroom. Gerald was in the backyard directing traffic like a general before battle. "Move that table 6 inches left. No, the good chairs go in front. Where are the name cards? Name cards at a family barbecue. I should have known then that nothing about this weekend was spontaneous." I found him arranging place settings at the main table and asked, "Dad, how many people are coming?" "About 40, maybe 45. All the neighbors, the family, some friends from the dealership. It's going to be quite a celebration." "And you invited the Kellers." He didn't look up from his arrangement. "Travis is coming, yes. He's doing real well, Cora. You should catch up. It's been, 5 years since you've seen him, since you had a choice about seeing him." I let a beat pass. "Did you invite Travis because of me?" He laughed, short, dismissive. "Don't flatter yourself. He's a family friend. Known him since he was in diapers." Family friend? Travis Keller had been to our house exactly twice before I left, both times at Gerald's invitation, both times seated next to me at dinner, both times after Gerald had loudly announced Travis's latest financial achievement, his newest business venture, his growing empire. Family friend was a generous description. Convenient prop was more accurate. Megan found me in the kitchen 10 minutes later. She pulled me into the pantry, between the canned peaches and the bulk rice, and whispered like we were conspirators in a spy novel. "Dad's been talking about Travis all week. He called him 2 days ago to confirm. Be careful." "Careful how?" She bit her lip. "He put Travis's name card next to your seat. I moved it. He put it back." My stomach dropped. The empty chair, the extra place setting. It hadn't been for some generic family friend. It had been for Travis, specifically, deliberately, placed next to me like an arranged marriage. Then Megan said something else, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, someone from Nathan's school called the house last week. Asked if Nathan was going to some ceremony on Monday. I didn't catch the details. I told them he was traveling." I didn't connect it. Not yet. I should have. The envelope, the official seal, the way Nathan had hidden it under his papers. The first guests arrived at noon. By 1 o'clock, the backyard was full. Aunts and uncles I hadn't seen since my 20s, their faces older, their hugs unchanged. Second cousins whose names I'd forgotten, who looked at me with the polite confusion reserved for relatives one only sees at weddings and funerals. Neighbors who still called me Little Cora, even though I was 33 with a nursing degree and a child and a mortgage. Country music drifted from a Bluetooth speaker on the porch railing. Kids chased each other across the lawn, their laughter mixing with the adult conversation in a way that felt both nostalgic and overwhelming. Diane floated between tables, refilling sweet tea and accepting compliments on the hydrangeas she'd planted along the fence line. She looked happy, genuinely happy, or at least skilled at performing it. This was her element: hostess, mother, wife. The roles she'd been playing for 45 years, polished to perfection. And then, a red BMW pulled into the driveway. Travis Keller stepped out like he was arriving at a magazine shoot. Navy blazer, no tie, loafers with no socks. He was 36 and looked it in the way that money makes you look. Tanned from a recent vacation, groomed by a stylist who knew exactly how to make him look effortlessly wealthy, confident in the way that only someone who has never doubted their place in the world can be. He smiled at the crowd gathered in the yard, a practiced smile that showed teeth whitened by professionals. Gerald crossed the yard in 4 strides. He shook Travis's hand with both of his, pumping it enthusiastically, clapping him on the shoulder like he was welcoming home a war hero. I watched from the porch. My father hadn't greeted Nathan with half that warmth, hadn't shaken his hand with a fraction of that enthusiasm. "Cora," Gerald called, "come say hello." I walked over with Nathan beside me. Lily was on Nathan's hip, picking at a flower she'd pulled from the garden, completely oblivious to the tension radiating through the air like heat waves off asphalt. "Cora, you remember Travis? He just got back from a trip to Italy. Tell her, Travis. Tell her about the Amalfi Coast. Travis smiled. Polite, rehearsed, the Amalfi Coast. Incredible. The seafood, the views, you'd love it. And this is Nathan, Gerald said. He paused before the word husband. Cora's husband. The pause was a scalpel. Small, precise, surgical. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood what it meant. Travis extended his hand. Nathan shifted Lily to his other hip and shook it. Good to meet you, Nathan said. His voice was even. No hint of the insult he'd just received. Likewise, Travis said, but he wasn't looking at Nathan. He was looking at me. Gerald clapped Travis on the shoulder. Travis, tell them about the new showroom. Tell them about the 12,000 square feet in Buckhead. Just opened last month, Travis said. We're already exceeding projections. See, Gerald beamed at the table. That's ambition. That's what a career looks like. Nathan said nothing. He adjusted Lily's sandal strap and kissed the top of her head. My father was performing, and we were all supposed to be his audience. We were supposed to watch and understand the message being delivered. Travis was what Nathan should have been. Travis was what I should have chosen. Travis was what Gerald had wanted for his daughter all along. The insult came during the main course. Gerald stood at the head of the table, tapping his glass with a butter knife. The clinking cut through the conversations like a bell, and 40-some people turned to look. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked Diane for 45 years of marriage. He thanked God, the caterer, the weather. He was good at this, the public performance of a family man. The benevolent patriarch surrounded by loved ones. Then he turned to our end of the table. His eyes landed on Nathan like a searchlight. Nathan, why don't you tell everyone what you do? It wasn't a question. It was a setup. I could feel it the way you feel thunder before you hear it, the pressure change in the air, the static electricity raising the hair on your arms. This was what the whole weekend had been building toward. The chair next to me, the comparison to Travis, the questions about ambition and salaries and lake houses, all leading to this moment. Nathan set his fork down gently. I'm a high school history teacher in Savannah. Gerald tilted his head. Let the silence cook for a beat. 2 beats. A teacher? He let out a half laugh, not quite a sneer, not quite a joke. Worse, something in between that could be dismissed as teasing if anyone called him on it. You just babysit kids for pennies. The yard went silent. 40 people. The clink of ice in someone's glass. A mockingbird in the oak tree overhead. The Bluetooth speaker between songs. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, a rapid thumping that matched the pulse in my throat. Nathan placed his napkin beside his plate. He looked at my father, not with anger, not with hurt, with recognition, the look of a man who just had a suspicion confirmed, who had been waiting for this moment all weekend, maybe all 5 years. He said nothing. Lily was on his lap. She looked up at him with her big brown eyes. Daddy, why is Grandpa laughing? My chest cracked open. Right there at the table, something broke that I didn't know could still break. Not because of what Gerald said to Nathan. Nathan could handle Gerald. Nathan had handled worse than Gerald. But Lily heard it. My 4-year-old heard her grandfather call her father worthless, and she didn't understand why the adults were frozen, and she didn't understand the silence. And she asked the only honest question anyone at that table had the courage to ask. That was my limit. 3 seconds of silence, maybe 4. It felt like 30. Aunt Ruth looked down at her potato salad like it held the secret to time travel. Uncle Jim cleared his throat. Diane reached for her glass and missed it by an inch. Travis sat 2 chairs away, swirling his wine, studying the label like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever read. Not one person at that table said a word in Nathan's defense. Not one. Gerald straightened his collar. No offense, Nathan. In this family, we build things, we don't babysit. Nathan looked at him for 1 more second. Then he turned to Lily. Hey, sweetheart. His voice was soft, warm, completely unchanged. You want to go see the fireflies in the yard? Lily's face lit up. Yes. He lifted her off his lap, took her hand, and they walked across the lawn together. Past the banner that read Whitfield family, 45 years. Past the catering table. past the 40 guests who watched them go and then turned back to their plates as if nothing had happened. That was the moment I realized something fundamental about my family. They didn't just fail to protect us. They participated. Every person at that table had heard the insult. Every person had seen Lily's confusion. And every person had chosen to say nothing, because that was easier. Because that's what we did in the Whitfield family. We swallowed insults. We pretended everything was fine. We prioritized peace over truth. I wanted to leave that night. I told Nathan while Lily slept between us on the air mattress, her small chest rising and falling like a metronome, completely unaware of the storm brewing around her. My voice was a whisper, but the anger wasn't. It burned in my chest like heartburn, like something I couldn't swallow down no matter how hard I tried. We're leaving tomorrow morning. First thing, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I can't watch him treat you like that and pretend it doesn't matter. Nathan propped himself on his elbow. In the dark, I could only see the outline of his face, the shape of his jaw, the glint of his eyes catching the streetlight through the blinds. I need to ask you something, he said. What? Can we stay until Monday? I almost laughed. Monday? Why would you want to spend one more minute in this house? Why would you want to subject yourself to one more day of my father's comments, my mother's tears, my family's silence? We won't be in this house. We'll be in Savannah. He reached over to his bag on the floor and pulled out the manila envelope, the one from the kitchen table back home, the one stamped with the Chatham County Board of Education seal. The one I'd seen and hadn't asked about, too distracted by my own anxiety to notice the significance of what he was carrying. He handed it to me. I opened it in the faint light from the window, a formal letter, embossed letterhead, words I had to read twice to believe. Teacher of the Year, Chatham County. The ceremony is Monday afternoon at the Civic Center. I stared at him. Nathan, when did you find out? 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks, and you didn't tell me. He was quiet. Then, I didn't want you to think I was trying to prove something to your father. That's not what this is about. It was never about him. Then, what is it about? My students wrote letters. My principal said they've been planning this for months. I wasn't going to go, but Marcus, you remember Marcus Hall? He called me yesterday and said he's flying in from Atlanta to speak. I held the letter against my chest in the dark. The paper was smooth, official, real. My husband had been carrying this in his bag the entire trip. He'd known, walking into my parents' house, that he was going to receive the highest honor his profession could offer. And he hadn't said a word. Not when Gerald called him a babysitter. Not when 40 people looked away. Not when Travis Keller sat 2 chairs down, the living embodiment of everything my father wished Nathan was. He didn't need Gerald's approval. He never had. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The letter was just paper. The ceremony was just an event. What mattered to Nathan, what had always mattered, was showing up for his students, for our family, for the things that actually counted. Sunday morning, Megan texted me at 7. Coffee, that place on Main. I left Nathan and Lily asleep and drove to a small diner 2 blocks from the house. The same diner where Megan and I had shared milkshakes after school, where I'd cried after my first breakup, where I'd told her I was pregnant with Lily before I told anyone else. The booths were still red vinyl, the coffee still came in thick white mugs, and the smell of bacon grease still clung to everything like a second skin. Megan was already in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a mug, looking like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that was coming loose. She looked older than 37. She looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I need to tell you something, she said before I even sat down. Something I should have told you before you came this weekend. Okay. Dad planned this, all of it. I slid into the booth across from her. Planned what exactly? Travis, the seating, the question about Nathan's job, all of it. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't just Dad being Dad. He orchestrated the whole thing. She lowered her voice, leaning across the table. 2 weeks before the reunion, Dad called Travis directly. I was in the hallway. He didn't know I could hear. He said, and I'm quoting, "I want you there sitting next to Cora so she can see what she could have had." I let that land. The words sat between us like a third person at the table. There's more, Megan said. He told people. Mrs. Patterson, the Hendersons, the Lyles. He told them you and Nathan were having problems, that you were probably getting a divorce soon. He said it like it was fact. That's a lie. We're not having any problems. I know, but he said it 3 weeks ago, before you even agreed to come. He was setting up a narrative. If you showed up without Nathan, it confirmed his story. If you showed up with Nathan, he'd embarrass him until you wished you hadn't. Either way, he won. The coffee was bitter. My hands were shaking. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Megan's eyes went glassy. I've been living under his roof my whole life, Cora. I didn't know how to say no to him. I still sleep in my childhood bedroom. I'm 37 years old and I ask my father's permission before I make major purchases. I didn't know how to stand up to him. I still don't. She wiped her eyes with her napkin. I should have called you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I reached across the table and held her hand. My sister. My complicated, complicit, frightened sister. For the first time, I saw her not as Gerald's ally, but as his other prisoner. She was 37 years old, unmarried, living at home, working a job she didn't love because it was what our father approved of, her life a smaller and smaller circle drawn by a man who couldn't tolerate defiance. She wasn't my enemy. She was another casualty. This wasn't a reunion. It was a courtroom. And Nathan had been the defendant before he ever walked through the door. I went back to the house after coffee with Megan. I thought about packing the car. I thought about it hard, imagined loading Lily's car seat in our bags and driving away without another word. But Sunday brunch was already underway. About 15 people, the overnight relatives, a few neighbors who'd wandered back for leftovers, gathered around the dining room table. Scrambled eggs, biscuits, grits, Gerald at the head, holding court. Nathan was helping Lily cut her pancake into triangles. He was wearing the same calm expression he wore in his classroom. Steady, present, unreachable. Whatever was happening in his head, whatever he was feeling about yesterday's humiliation, it didn't show. He could have been at any breakfast table in America, helping his daughter with her pancakes. Gerald was talking to Uncle Jim, but his voice carried. It was meant to. You know what teachers make in Georgia? 45, 50 grand if they're lucky. My receptionist made more than that, and she only worked 4 days a week. A few people chuckled, the polite kind, the kind that said, I don't want to be involved, but I also don't want to be rude. The kind that let cruelty pass because confrontation would be uncomfortable. Gerald turned to Nathan, smiled, the smile of a man twisting a knife and calling it a handshake. No hard feelings, right, Nathan? I just worry about my little girl. Nathan looked up from Lily's pancake. I appreciate your concern, Gerald. 4 words. Gerald's smile faltered, just a crack. He wanted a fight. Nathan gave him nothing. No anger, no defensiveness, just acknowledgement and dismissal in equal measure. So Gerald changed targets. He leaned toward Lily. My daughter, 4 years old, syrup on her chin, completely innocent of the war being fought around her. You know, sweetheart, if your daddy had a better job, you could have a bigger room. Grandpa could buy you the prettiest dollhouse in the whole world. Your daddy's boss doesn't pay him enough for one, does he? I heard the words hit the air like stones dropping into still water. Every ripple moved outward across the table, disturbing the surface of what had been, moments before, a peaceful breakfast. Megan froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Diane reached for the jam. Uncle Jim studied his biscuit with sudden intensity. And something inside me went very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a decision you can't take back. The kind of quiet that's actually calm. Not peace, clarity. I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic. I set my napkin beside my plate, pushed my chair back, and stood the way you stand when you've made a decision that's been building for 5 years and 3 seconds. Dad. He looked at me, still smiling, still performing. You will not talk to my daughter about her father that way. Not today, not ever. The smile dimmed. I'm just being honest, Cora. No, you're being cruel, and you're doing it in front of a 4-year-old. Diane's hand shot across the table toward mine. Cora, don't make a scene. Mom, I looked at her, really looked at her. A scene was made the second Dad decided to humiliate my husband at his own anniversary party. I just wasn't the one who made it. The room went tight. 15 people breathing shallow. Uncle Jim set down his fork. Aunt Ruth pressed her lips together and stared at the tablecloth. The clock in the hallway ticked. Then Megan did something I never expected. She stood up. She didn't say a word. She just pushed her chair back and walked around the table until she was standing beside me, shoulder to shoulder. It was a small thing, 6 steps and a change of position. But in this family, where geography at the table was politics, where seating arrangements were statements, it was seismic. Gerald's face shifted. The performance cracked. You're choosing a teacher over your own family. His voice dropped low, not shouting, worse, cold. I looked at him, my father, 67 years old, standing at the head of his table in his own house, surrounded by people who were afraid to disagree with him, who had spent decades swallowing their own opinions to keep the peace. I'm choosing my family, I said. Nathan and Lily are my family. He held my gaze. I held his. You don't get to define my family's worth by the size of a paycheck. The silence after that sentence was the loudest sound in the room. Gerald's neck went red. It started below his collar and climbed like a vine, a flush of anger that he couldn't control. If you walk out that door, he said, don't come back. I almost smiled, almost, because he'd said those exact words to me 5 years ago in this exact house with that exact tone. And here we were, same script, same man, same threat. You said that 5 years ago, Dad. I survived. I turned to Nathan. He was already standing, Lily on his hip. Our bag was by the door. He'd packed it that morning quietly without being asked because Nathan always knew before I did when it was time to go. It was one of the things I loved about him. He didn't need to be told. He just knew. We walked to the front door. 15 people at the table and not one of them moved. Not to stop us. Not to follow. Not to say goodbye. Except Diane. She caught my arm in the hallway. Her mascara was running. Please don't go. He'll calm down. He always does, just give him time. He doesn't need to calm down, Mom. I turned to face her. He needs to change. And you need to stop making excuses for him. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. 45 years of marriage and she had no words for this moment, no defense that would hold. Nathan buckled Lily into her car seat. I loaded the bag into the trunk. The Georgia sun was brutal and indifferent, already heating the pavement, promising another scorching summer day. Megan came through the front door, walking fast. She leaned into my open car window, eyes red, voice barely above a whisper. I'll call you tonight. I squeezed her hand through the window. Then I put the car in reverse. As we backed out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. Gerald was standing on the porch, arms crossed, jaw set. Diane was beside him, clutching a dish towel like a lifeline. Neither of them waved. Lily's voice came from the back seat, small and clear. Are we going home, Mommy? Nathan turned around and smiled at her. Not yet, Ladybug. Daddy has something to do tomorrow. I didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would be the day everything shifted. The day the balance of power in my family would tilt irrevocably, and my father would finally understand that the world had moved on without him. We drove to a motel 20 minutes from my parents' house. I didn't want to make the 4-hour drive to Savannah that night, not upset, not in the dark with Lily in the back seat. We'd leave first thing Monday morning. Nathan didn't push. He carried Lily inside, tucked her into the stiff motel bed, and sat on the edge while she fell asleep with her stuffed elephant, the one I'd bought her when she was 2, now worn soft from years of hugs. Are you okay? I asked from the doorway. He looked at me. I'm better than okay. I just didn't want Lily to hear those things. She's 4. She won't remember. She might. We didn't sleep much. We lay in the dark and listened to the ice machine hum outside the door. At some point, I rolled over and said, I'm proud of you. And Nathan said, I didn't do anything. And I said, I know that's why. Monday morning, we were on the road by 7, 4 hours to Savannah. Lily fell asleep before we hit the interstate, her head lolling against the car seat, her elephant clutched to her chest. At 11, we pulled into our driveway. The azaleas in our front yard were blooming, pink and white against the green, and for a moment I just sat in the car and looked at our house. Our small, modest house that Nathan had bought with a teacher's salary and careful saving. Our house that Gerald had called a starter home and predicted we'd outgrow within 5 years. Our house that was filled with photos of Lily and books on every surface and the smell of coffee in the mornings. Our house that was exactly big enough for our family and perfect because it was ours. Nathan showered, put on his good shirt, the white Oxford he wore to parent-teacher conferences, and a navy tie. The $20 tie I'd bought him at Marshall's 3 Christmases ago when we'd been married 2 years and money was tight and I'd wanted to give him something nice. He'd worn it to every important event since. Job interviews, award ceremonies, Lily's preschool graduation. He said it was his lucky tie. I put on a sundress. Lily wore her yellow flowered dress, the one with the smocked bodice that her grandmother had never seen. Nathan called Principal Dawson to confirm the details of the ceremony. "Nathan, the auditorium is packed," Dawson said through the speakerphone. "Your students have been rehearsing their letters all weekend. Half the county is here. The superintendent, the school board, parents. I've never seen anything like it." Nathan straightened his tie in the hallway mirror. His hands were steady. He looked calm, the same calm he'd worn all weekend, the same calm he wore every day in a classroom full of teenagers. Whatever nerves he might have been feeling, they didn't show. My phone buzzed, a text from Megan. "I told Dad there's an event in Savannah this afternoon related to Nathan. I told him he should come. He's still at the hotel. He said yes." My heart hammered against my ribs. He doesn't know what it is. No, he thinks it'll prove him right. He thinks it's some little participation certificate. He has no idea. I set the phone down. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something else. Something that felt like the moment before a storm breaks, when the pressure drops and the air goes still, and you know that everything is about to change. The Chatham County Civic Center was built in the 70s and still smelled like old carpet and ambition. But today it was transformed. A banner across the stage read, "Chatham County Teacher of the Year 2026, in blue and gold letters. Rows of folding chairs filled the auditorium. More than 300 people, teachers in their professional best, parents with programs in their laps. Students fidgeting, whispering, holding handmade signs that said things like, "Mr. B is the best," and "Thank you for believing in me." Nathan walked in through the side entrance. Principal Dawson met him with a handshake and a lapel pin, a small gold apple that caught the light. I took Lily to the 3rd row. Good seats, close enough to see his face, close enough to catch every expression. The ceremony opened with the Pledge of Allegiance. Then the school choir sang the national anthem, their young voices rising to the rafters. Then, Superintendent Martha Collins stepped to the podium. She was a tall woman with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the kind of voice that made you sit up straighter, that commanded attention without raising volume. "Every year," she began, "we recognize one educator who represents the best of what this profession can be. Not the flashiest, not the loudest, but the one whose impact is measured in lives changed, in students who return years later to say thank you, in futures that were altered because someone cared enough to show up." I scanned the auditorium. 3 rows behind me on the left side, I saw them. Gerald, Deanne, sitting in folding chairs like everyone else. Gerald was wearing his polo shirt from the reunion. He hadn't brought other clothes. Deanne had her purse on her lap, clutched tight. They looked out of place, uncomfortable, like people who had walked into a room expecting one thing and were slowly realizing they were somewhere else entirely. This year's recipient, Superintendent Collins, continued, has given 12 years to public education. He has coached debate teams to state championships. He has volunteered hundreds of hours mentoring at-risk youth in our community. And in the words of one former student, she paused, adjusted her glasses. "He is the only reason I'm alive today." She turned toward the wings of the stage. "Please welcome Mr. Nathan Brennan." The auditorium erupted. 300 people stood. Lily bounced on my lap and yelled, "That's my daddy." And 3 rows back, Gerald Whitfield did not move. Nathan took the stage the way he entered every classroom, without fanfare, without pretension. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the crowd. He found me in the third row and gave me the smallest nod. Just for me, just for us. But before he could speak, Superintendent Collins announced the student tributes. The first voice belonged to Dr. Marcus Hall, 28 years old, white coat ceremony behind him, residency ahead of him. He walked to the podium with a folded piece of paper in hands that shook. When I was 16, Marcus said, I was sleeping in my car. The auditorium went still. My mom was gone. No family. No address. I showed up to school every day because it was warm and because Mr. Brennan never asked me why my clothes smelled like motor oil. He never asked why I was always the first one there and the last one to leave. He just noticed. He paid attention. He unfolded the paper. His voice cracked. He found out I was homeless. He didn't report me to some office. He drove me to school every morning for a year. He paid for my AP exam fees out of his own pocket. He co-signed my college application fee waiver. And when I got into Emory, when I stood there in my white coat last year, he was the only adult in the front row. Marcus stopped, wiped his eyes. 300 people were silent, the kind of silence that holds its breath. I'm a doctor today because a teacher believed in me when nobody else did. Because Mr. Brennan saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. The applause came in waves. People were crying. The woman next to me handed me a tissue and I realized I needed one too. I hadn't known. Nathan had never told me the full story. He'd mentioned Marcus, mentioned a student who'd had a hard time, but he'd never shared the details. That was Nathan. He didn't share his victories. He didn't brag about the lives he'd changed. He just did the work. Then Jamie Ostrowski, 24, first-generation college graduate, now a young attorney in Macon, stepped up to the podium. Mr. Brennan taught me that history isn't about memorizing dates. It's about understanding why people make the choices they do. He changed how I see the world. He changed how I see myself. I'm the first person in my family to go to law school, and I wouldn't be here without him. Student after student came forward. A young woman now working in public health. A young man starting his own business. A teacher, inspired by Nathan to enter the profession herself. Each story a thread in a tapestry Nathan had been weaving for 12 years without ever asking for recognition. I turned around. I had to see. Gerald sat rigid. His hands were clenched on his thighs. Diane was pressing a handkerchief to her face, not performing this time, just crying. Gerald's mouth was a thin line. His eyes were locked on the man standing on that stage, the man he'd called a babysitter 2 days ago. And for the first time, he was seeing Nathan through 300 pairs of eyes that weren't his own. He was seeing his son-in-law the way the world saw him, not as a man who'd failed to become wealthy, but as a man who had changed lives. Who had saved lives. Who was rich in something that couldn't be deposited in a bank. Nathan stepped to the microphone. He didn't have a prepared speech. No cards, no notes, just his hands resting lightly on the podium like he was about to start a Monday morning lesson. I'm not good at speeches, he said. A few people laughed softly. But I want to say something. He paused. Someone told me recently that what I do is babysitting for pennies. A ripple of quiet laughter. They thought it was a joke, a self-deprecating opener. Nathan let it settle. And I thought about that. I thought about it all weekend. The laughter faded. Something in his voice told them this wasn't a punchline. This was something else. Here's what I realized. They were right about one thing. I don't do this for the money. I never did. He looked at Marcus in the front row. At Jamie. At the 17-year-old kid with the homemade poster that said, Mr. B changed my life. I do this because a 16-year-old kid sleeping in his car deserves someone who shows up. I do this because every child in my classroom deserves to know that their potential isn't measured by their parents' bank account. I do this because someone believed in me once, and the only way I know how to pay that forward is to believe in them. He paused. The auditorium was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning hum. A teacher's pay doesn't define a teacher's worth, and neither does anyone's opinion. 300 people stood. The ovation rolled through the room like weather. starting in the back and sweeping forward until everyone was on their feet. Students, parents, teachers who knew exactly what Nathan meant because they lived it every day. People who had spent their careers being undervalued and underpaid and overlooked, hearing their own struggle articulated by a man who had never stopped fighting for their profession. Nathan looked down at us. At me, at Lily, who was clapping with her whole body, bouncing on my lap, yelling, "Yay, Daddy." He smiled, just for us. He didn't look at Gerald. He didn't need to. The message had already landed. The lobby afterward was a slow-moving river of handshakes and camera flashes. Nathan stood near the exit, surrounded by parents and students who wanted photos, signatures on programs, a chance to say thank you. He shook every hand. He remembered every name. He knelt down to take pictures with children. He hugged former students who had traveled hours to be there. I watched him move through the crowd, and I saw what I'd always known but had never quite understood until this moment. Nathan wasn't just a teacher. He was a pillar, a foundation, someone people built their lives around without even realizing it. I was holding Lily when I saw Gerald approach. He walked through the crowd like a man who'd forgotten how to use his legs. Diane was behind him, one hand on his elbow, guiding him. They stopped a few feet from Nathan, and Gerald waited. Waited for the circle of well-wishers to thin, waited for a moment of privacy. When it did, Gerald stepped forward. Nathan. Nathan turned. His face was neutral, not cold, not warm, patient. The way he looked at a student who'd finally raised a hand after weeks of silence. "I didn't know about all this," Gerald said. "About the students, about the awards, about any of it." "You didn't ask." The words were simple. They carried no venom, but they landed like a closing argument. 5 years of dismissal, 5 years of contempt, 5 years of treating Nathan like a disappointment. And the truth was, Gerald had never once asked, had never once tried to understand who Nathan was or what he did. He'd assumed. He'd judged. He'd dismissed. Gerald's jaw worked. He looked at the banner on the wall, at the programs littering the chairs, at the reporter from the Savannah Morning News who was interviewing Marcus Hall 3 feet away. He started and stopped. Maybe I was out of line yesterday. Nathan looked at him. 12 years of teaching had given him the kind of patience that made other people uncomfortable, because they couldn't tell if it was forgiveness or a verdict. "You were out of line 5 years ago, Gerald. Yesterday was just a reminder." Gerald flinched, a small one, a twitch near his left eye that I'd only seen once before, the day he'd lost a dealership contract he'd thought was guaranteed. The day something had slipped beyond his control. Nathan didn't wait for a response. He turned back to a student who was tugging his sleeve. Gerald stood in the middle of that lobby, 300 people flowing around him, and for the first time in his 67 years, he had absolutely nothing to say. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something quieter, something closer to grief. For the relationship my father could have had with Nathan if he'd chosen curiosity over judgment. For the years wasted on pride that had no foundation. For the grandfather Lily might have had, if that grandfather had been capable of seeing past his own ego. "I don't need you to be impressed," I thought, looking at my father's stunned face. "I need you to be decent." Megan called me that night. It was after 9. Lily was asleep in her own bed for the first time in 4 days. Nathan was in the kitchen washing dishes, humming something low under his breath. The normal sounds of our life. The sounds I'd chosen 5 years ago. "He hasn't said a word," Megan said. "Not since we left the auditorium. Nothing. He sat in the hotel parking lot for 20 minutes before starting the engine. Just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. I've never seen him do that. Dad always has something to say. Always." I leaned against the kitchen door frame and watched Nathan scrub a pot. His hands were steady. His shoulders relaxed. He was exactly where he wanted to be, doing exactly what he wanted to do. At peace in a way my father had never been. On the drive back, Megan continued, he pulled into a gas station. Got out, stood by the pump, didn't pump gas, just stood there. Then he got back in. "What about Mom?" "She's been crying. The real kind this time, not the performance kind. She called your name twice in the car when she thought I wasn't listening." I closed my eyes. Then Megan said about an hour from home, Dad finally spoke. He said one thing. What? He said, that kid, the doctor. He called Nathan the only adult who showed up. I waited. That's it, Megan said. Then he went quiet again. I pressed my palm to my forehead. This was not the Gerald I knew. The Gerald I knew would have driven home, poured a bourbon, and crafted an argument for why the ceremony meant nothing. The Gerald I knew didn't go silent. Silence was defeat, and Gerald Whitfield didn't do defeat. It's not an apology, I said. No, it's not, but it's something. It's the most I've ever seen from him, the most acknowledgement that maybe he was wrong. We sat in the quiet for a moment. Two sisters on opposite ends of a phone line, trying to figure out if a 67-year-old man could bend without breaking. I've never seen Dad look small before, Megan said. He looked small tonight. I didn't know if that made me feel better or worse. Better, because it meant something had gotten through. Worse, because my father's smallness was a tragedy of his own making. He'd spent 67 years building himself into someone who couldn't be wrong, and now that he was, he had no tools to handle it. The article ran Wednesday, Savannah Morning News. Local teacher named Chatham County Teacher of the Year. A full half-page in the community section. Nathan's photo, the one they'd taken on stage with the plaque. Marcus beside him, beaming. A pull quote in bold. I'm a doctor today because a teacher believed in me when nobody else did. The reporter had called Nathan on Tuesday for a follow-up. She'd asked about the mentorship program he ran on weekends for at-risk students. She'd asked about the debate team's state championship run. She'd asked how it felt to be recognized. Nathan had said, the recognition belongs to my students. I just open the door, they walk through it. That quote made it into the article, too. And then Megan did something small and deliberate. She shared the article on Facebook, tagged nothing, wrote nothing, just the link, posted it, walked away. Within 2 days, every person in my parents' social circle had seen it. The Hendersons, the Lyles, the women from Diane's garden club, the men Gerald played cards with at the VFW, and Mrs. Patterson, the woman Gerald had told that Nathan and I were getting divorced. She called Diane on Thursday morning. Megan told me about it later. I saw the article, Mrs. Patterson said. Nathan seems like a wonderful man. Silence on the line. I have to say, Diane, Gerald told me they were having problems. Told me Cora was getting a divorce. That doesn't look like a woman getting a divorce. That looks like a woman standing behind her husband at a ceremony in front of 300 people. Diane didn't know what to say. She stammered something about miscommunication, about not knowing the whole story. Mrs. Patterson wasn't buying it. Gerald's careful story, the one he'd been whispering for weeks, the one designed to make me look unstable and Nathan look inadequate. It collapsed overnight. He didn't need anyone to expose him. The truth did it on its own, printed in black and white on page B4 of the local paper. The babysitter made the front page of the community section. The car dealer made excuses in private phone calls that got more awkward by the day. He called on a Saturday, 1 week after the reunion. 7 days of silence, which for Gerald Whitfield was a geological event, a shift in the tectonic plates of his personality. Cora, his voice was different, not smaller, not apologetic, just uncertain. I'd never heard my father uncertain. It sounded like a language he'd just started learning. Hi, Dad. A pause. I could hear the clock in his study. The grandfather clock my mother had inherited from her aunt. It ticked loud enough to fill the gaps in any conversation, which was probably why Gerald liked making calls from that room. I'm not going to say I was wrong about everything. He cleared his throat. But I was wrong about that, about what I said at dinner, about Nathan. Which time, Dad? Saturday or Sunday or 5 years ago? He was quiet long enough for the clock to tick 9 times. I counted all of them. 9 ticks, 9 seconds, 9 eternities. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Nathan was in the living room reading to Lily. I could hear him doing the voice of the Gruff in our worn copy of the Gruffalo, Lily's current favorite. His voice rose and fell with the story, animated and warm. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, "but words don't fix this. You talked about my husband like he was nothing in front of your granddaughter. You told your friends I was getting a divorce. You invited Travis to sit next to me like you were casting a role in a play you'd been writing for years. I know. You tried to humiliate the man I love in front of 40 people because he didn't fit your definition of success. And you did it at your own anniversary party, at a celebration of your marriage, as if your marriage was more valid than mine because your bank account was bigger. I know. If you want a relationship with Lily," I said, "it starts with respecting her father. Not tolerating him, respecting him, understanding who he is, seeing what he actually does." "I'll try." "Trying isn't enough. I need you to actually do it. And if you can't, then we'll keep our distance. Lily won't grow up thinking it's okay to be treated the way you treated Nathan. She won't learn that love means tearing other people down to feel taller." The clock ticked. Gerald exhaled. "Okay, Cora, okay." I hung up. No tears, no hugging, no dramatic music, just a line drawn in clear, calm language. A boundary that should have existed 5 years ago. That would have saved us all so much pain if I'd had the courage to draw it then. Love without respect is just control with a nicer name. 2 weeks later, Megan called me with news. I signed a lease. A lease. An apartment, a 1-bedroom near Forsyth Park. I move in Saturday. I sat down on the porch steps. My sister, who had lived under Gerald Whitfield's roof for 37 years, who had slept in her childhood bedroom through college and graduate school and 2 failed relationships, who had asked our father's permission to buy a car at age 34, had signed a lease on her own apartment. "Me watching you stand up to Dad," she paused. "It made me realize I've been waiting for permission my whole life. From him, from Mom, from everyone. And nobody was ever going to give it to me. I had to take it." She moved that Saturday. Nathan and I helped carry boxes. Lily helped by sitting in an empty moving box and pretending it was a spaceship. Megan hung a print on her living room wall that night. It said, "Not my circus, not my monkeys." I laughed until I cried. As for Gerald and Diane, we set rules. Simple, non-negotiable. Every visit required both Nathan and me to agree. No surprises, no ambush guests. Nathan's name would be spoken with respect at the table, on the phone, in conversations with friends. If we heard otherwise, we'd hear about it and the visits would stop. Travis Keller would not be mentioned, invited, or referenced. Ever. Any violation meant no contact, no negotiation, no second chances. Gerald accepted the terms. I could hear it cost him, the way his breathing changed. The way he said "fine" like the word had thorns, but he accepted. Because for the first time, he understood that he could lose both daughters at once, and his anniversary banner would hang in an empty yard. Nathan went back to school that Monday. Same tie, same lesson plan, same hallway. He didn't mention Gerald to anyone. He never did. The Teacher of the Year plaque sits on a bookshelf in our living room now. Next to it is a framed photo from the ceremony. Nathan and Lily on stage. Lily's arms around his neck, both of them laughing at something only they understood. A month later, I was picking Lily up from preschool when she ran to me across the playground. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders. Her shoes were untied. Her face was bright with the news she couldn't wait to share. "Mommy, my teacher says Daddy is famous." I laughed. "Daddy isn't famous, baby. He's just good at what he does." She thought about that for a second, tilted her head the way she does when she's working through a big idea. The same way Nathan tilts his head when he's considering a student's question. Is that the same thing? I stopped walking. I looked at my daughter, 4 years old, shoelaces dragging, wisdom falling out of her mouth like spare change, and I thought about everything that had led to that sentence, everything we'd survived, everything we'd built. "Yeah," I said, "maybe it is." We drove home. Nathan's car was already in the driveway. Through the window, I could see him at the kitchen table, gratting papers, red pen in hand, mug of coffee going cold beside him. The same scene I'd walked into 1,000 times. The same man, unchanged, unbroken, worth more than Gerald Whitfield had ever understood. I didn't go back to that reunion to get revenge. I went because I wanted my daughter to know her grandparents. What I got instead was a reminder that stayed with me every day since. You can't control how people see you, but you can control who you allow at your table. You can't force someone to respect you, but you can refuse to stay where you're disrespected. And sometimes, the people who should love you the most need to see you walk away before they understand what they're losing. My father measured people in dollars. My husband measures them in potential, in possibility, in the distance between who they are and who they could become. And every morning when Nathan Brennan puts on his $20 tie and drives to a building full of kids who need him, he is worth more than Gerald Whitfield ever understood. He is changing lives. He is building futures. He is showing up. Respect isn't earned by a bank statement. It's earned by showing up, especially when no one's watching, especially when it costs you something, especially when the people who should be cheering are instead sharpening their knives. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. If you've ever had to set a boundary with someone you love, a parent, a sibling, someone who was supposed to be in your corner, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Drop your story in the comments. And if this story reminded you of someone who deserves more respect than they're getting, share it with them. Remind them that their worth isn't defined by anyone's opinion. There's another story waiting for you in the description. It's about a woman whose in-laws tried to take credit for everything she built. I think you'll connect with it. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you there.